Hello. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. What's the most recent Tamora Pierce book you've read? For me, it's Tortall and Other Lands, a short story collection that should be called Dragon Stories and Other Short Fiction by Tamora Pierce. If you don't know Tamora Pierce, she's a young adult, primarily young adult, fantasy author who published between 1983 and 2018. If you are familiar with Tamora Pierce, I think there's a pretty good chance that you maybe still haven't read this collection. There may also be a chance that you read it and were disappointed by it because none of the stories take place in Tortall and only a small handful of them feature characters from the series. There are 3 stories in this that have dragons, so that's why I think it should be called Dragon Stories and Other Short Fiction or something like that. If you like fantasy stories, if you're willing to read short fantasy stories, this would not be a bad place to start with Tamora Pierce. It's a pretty good survey of her humor, her dialogue style, how she builds characters, especially in a compressed page space. Give it a shot if you come across it in the library or a thrift store, or seek it out if you were a fan of Tamora Pierce and kind of dismissed it. I like Tamora Pierce's writing style, so this is a satisfying read for me. And the structure of this is pretty well paced too. You could read this whole thing in a day if you really wanted to and didn't want to do anything else. Some other overviews real quick. 11 short stories in this. I am going to talk about each of these at some length. I imagine I will put timestamps so that any that you are familiar with or that particularly sound interesting, you can go ahead and jump to my discussion about that specific story. 9 of these stories center female or female-coded protagonists. Not all of the protagonists are human or fully human, and the other 2 feature male or male-coded protagonists. This video, I will bookend talking about those 2 stories, Elder Brother and Nawat. Spoilers. Always spoilers. I had to pause my first recording to actually write out a list for myself in the order that I want to talk about these stories. We're going to start with Elder Brother, one of the male-coded protagonist stories. In Elder Brother, it explores the first few days of a tree turned into a man by Numair. Numair is a character from the Immortals series who recurs in a couple of the later series. He's one of the most powerful known mages in the world, and he turns an enemy into a tree to save his companion, which correspondingly turns a tree into a man. Directly following that story is Hidden Girl. Hidden Girl was published in another anthology, so that tells me that it should be able to stand on its own for an audience that has no familiarity with the Tortall world, but I don't know if I could really be the judge of that. The third story I'm going to talk about, The Dragon's Tale, features Kitten, who is a baby dragon for Dane and Numair. Kitten is small and determined to help somebody despite that fact. Mimic is another dragon story, an unusual dragon story. In this story, there is a valley that is protected by an agreement with the birds. Mimic, this one's interesting too. It's written in first-person perspective. The main character is female-coded. However, that's only evident in specific nicknames that are given to her by her grandfather. If not for those, I genuinely would not be sure if the character was male or female. Next, I'll talk about Plain Magic, which is the third dragon story. The summary, one-line summary, is what happens when you lose a lethal lottery. The 6th story I will talk about, Student of Ostriches. That is actually the first story in this collection, and it's one that just gets my heart pumping if I think about it. A girl watches the animals of the savannah, teaches herself how to fight, and at the age of 13 finds herself fighting a proven warrior for her sister's honor. Number 7 is Lost. This story features Darkings, which are a fantasy creation creature of Tamora Pierce's. They are essentially sentient ink blots created by an enemy turned to the protagonist's side via kindness. In this short story, the Darking helps a young mathematical genius escape an abusive household. The 8th story, Time of Proving. This is the shortest story, and it features Our Minotaurs Are Different. Huntress is a contemporary set story with a magical element, one of only 2 contemporary stories published by Tamora Pierce. And the 10th story, Testing, is the only publication by Tamora Pierce that features 0 magic. It is based on her own life experiences as a house mother in the late 70s, early 80s. And when I was reading that, especially after now listening to interviews with Tamora Pierce, I could really hear that one in her voice more than any other. And last will be Nawat. Nawat was a main character in the Tricksters duology. He was born a crow and he became a man for love. Now he has 3 babies and is struggling to balance expectations of himself and them as crows and as humans. Okay, now we get into the details and my thoughts and opinions, mostly. Elder brother. So I call this Numair's worst crime, turning this tree into a man and then really dropping the ball when it came to helping him in the transition. But in Numair's defense, he does try. Okay, so the tree kind of names himself Kyom, Qiom. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I'm going with Kyom. And one of the first things Numair does is place a language spell on him so that he can understand his own thoughts and communicate with the humans around him. One of the things is they're on the opposite side of the world from Numair. The magic works insofar as giving Kyom some grasp of language, the facility of language, but it does nothing for the conditioning and acculturation that comes with existing for years and years as a human. And then one of the very first directions that Numair gives to Kyom is to steal clothes. That just, it makes sense for Numair's character, and it bothers me as a responsible person. Numair just as easily could have told him to go to a temple for help. The gods are very active in these fantasy stories, and a few days down the line, Kyom ends up getting brought to a temple anyway, identified as a God-touched or God-guided crazy person, and sent on his way without any harm. Numair could have saved him some pain and suffering and distress by directing him that way to begin with. Instead, eventually, Kyom has already had enough of trying to exist as a human, sits down to starve himself. And then comes along Fadal. Fadal is a young fellow who's not going to just let this elder brother, who seems healthy and fine, just give up. Tamora Pierce, her first published series is about Alana, who disguises herself as a boy to earn her knighthood and succeeds. In Elder Brother, this is what's presented as a more oppressive patriarchal society, overtly oppressive patriarchal society, where women are essentially veiled head to toe. Gender-based twist, Fadal is actually a female disguising and presenting herself as male. This is not necessarily a trans narrative because there's no indication that she wants to be male. She just doesn't want to be behind the veil. She doesn't want to be forced behind the veil. Kyom does not care about human concerns. He was a tree. He is struggling to be human. But through this story, he does come to care about Fadal and make choices, specifically coming up against he could leave and save himself moment, or he could discover what courage is and face his fear of fire. I don't think I even have to explain why a tree is afraid of fire. Faces his fear of fire to help his friend. So, it's a good story. And that story rolls right into the next story, The Hidden Girl. I'm not sure if that title actually refers to Fadal from the Elder Brother story or the main character of this story. I'm not sure how well The Hidden Girl stands up by itself. This is another one that was published in a different anthology on its own. So I'm going to trust that it does stand on its own for a reader who has no familiarity with the Tortall universe at all, or Elder Brother specifically. The very beginning of Hidden Girl overlaps with Elder Brother. Fadal appears, talks to Teki, the main character. Teki is a young woman, I think she's 16, who does exist wearing the veil in her culture, but it empowers her rather than being a chain of oppression as Fadal sees it and as is pretty much presented in Elder Brother. This is kind of why I'm not totally sure how well this does stand on its own. It's just so directly responsive to Elder Brother. So it might be the kind of thing that does just stand powerfully on its own, and then even better in reflection with Elder Brother. Teki, in short, travels with her father, who is ill, but her father was and has been a wandering priest within this society, and trying to keep this kind of brief, there's 2 religious books in this culture. For the last couple of 100 years, the Book of Sword has been emphasized over the Book of Distaff, so your sort of Book of Male has been emphasized over your Book of Female, and Teki and her father are working to sort of correct that balance. Ultimately, as I said before, the gods are very active in this fantasy world, and they reach through Teki to direct her with regards to that balance. The third story, The Dragon's Tale. This one centers Kitten. It is written in first-person perspective. Kitten is the baby dragon who is born in the first book of the Immortal series and is Dane's foster child, essentially, for the rest of probably Dane's life. Kitten does not have the ability to verbally communicate with anyone around her, but is just as or more intelligent than most people and creatures around her. She discovers a mystery and is determined to solve the problem on her own. It acknowledges in the text that if she just told Numair and Dane what the situation was, they could probably solve it just like that. And that's not what she wants. She is exploring her own possibilities and power, and at the end gets rewarded for it. The fourth story, Mimic. Mimic is the name of the strange lizard creature that the main character finds. This is really possibly my favorite. It's between Mimic and Student of Ostriches, I think, which of these is my favorite. And I think it's the only fantasy story I've ever read that has a tornado as a major plot feature that isn't like The Wizard of Oz. In a way, the story Mimic features like a magical vet, essentially. So if you like animals, which are a big thing in all Tamora Pierce books, animals not only have a presence, but impact on the plot and very much have personality. Lizards, birds, horses, dogs, goats, cats, birds. I think I said birds already. Just have so much personality and clear love from Tamora Pierce. Directly preceding Mimic is the third dragon story in this collection, titled Plain Magic. Written in first-person perspective, the main character is a 14-year-old girl. Her village is packing up and trying to decide what their best option is going to be if a dragon comes to attack them. If you're familiar with dragon lore, and you've got a 14-year-old virginal protagonist, I probably don't have to explain what the lethal lottery is there. A peddler comes along and makes a difference for her. This peddler very much invokes Lark from the Emmeline series. I do not believe she is Lark, but perhaps there's some seeds of Lark in that peddler character. Sixth, Student of Ostriches. First story in this collection. I think a great story to start the collection with. If you have no familiarity with Tamora Pierce and you just happen to pick up this book, it's immediately making it clear this is a fantasy setting. It seems to be African set. It's on the savannah, it seems. Student of Ostriches, your main female character, first person point of view, is taking care of the sheep herd, and while she's doing that, watching the animals on the plain. Zebras, ostriches, giraffes, elephants, lions, observing them and the way they battle and imitating them, developing her own fighting style up to the age of 13, where she fights somebody who would have dishonored her sister. The character, Kailea, was referenced in the Song of the Lioness series. All right, now we're on the back half. Number 7, Lost. I really like this one. This one's right up there in like the third or second position as a favorite. No, it'd have to be third or fourth if I'm between Ostriches and Mimic. So Lost, though. I truthfully don't know that there's more that I need to say than what I did in my quick summary. Lost is a darking. Darkings are fun, are different. Kind of the point of them is just because it doesn't look like a person doesn't mean it can't understand everything you're doing, doesn't mean it's not intelligent, capable, powerful. Adria is, I'm not even sure how old she's supposed to be, so I'll just say somewhere between 10 and 13. She really wants to study math because she recognizes that you can build the world with mathematics in a way. But her father is abusive, oppressive, and at the start of the story, she is still trying to do right to please him. And the Darking named Lost, who finds her, introduces the doubt that it's possible to please an abuser. And spoiler, Adria does escape at the end with her new friend. One of the reasons I really like Lost, the story, is because it really examples something that Tamora Pierce does a lot, which is bring real world sensibility in a way into this incredibly fantastic world. Mathematics and engineering in this case. They still use mathematics and engineering in a world with magic, to the extent that she can focus on it for a short story. I really enjoyed reading that. Number 8, Time of Proving. This is the shortest story in the collection, and in a way, the most random. It's the first one that goes from being the Tortall focused half of the book to the non-Tortall focused half of the book. But it's so fantasy that for a moment, I definitely didn't realize it when I was first reading it. Your main character is on a solo adventure or on a solo journey to prove herself as a leader to her people. And she comes across a Minotaur who has escaped slavery and is a poet. At the end of the story, they make a deal where she's going to help him get home safely, and he's going to teach her the value of poetry and beauty. So it's just a nice little story, nice little quick read, a little breather in the middle of this collection. Number 9, Huntress. Contemporary set, but with some magical elements. The voice in this one is kind of distinctly different, being its modern setting. It's really interesting to see Tammy's ability to switch it up a little bit in this. She uses some vocabulary in this contemporary set story, besides the words like cell phone and Central Park, that just make it really clear that this is different than all that came before it. Spoiled rich kids taking on the new girl discovers the new girl has some divine protection. For the first 2/3 of it, the main character does not believe that the magical element of her story exists. But in her moment of need, the goddess, unspecified goddess figure of the hunt, whom her female family members have honored and worshipped for generations, comes through for the main character in spite of her disbelief. This one is my least favorite in this collection, to the extent that I almost considered skipping it on the reread, although I'm glad that I did not. Tamora Pierce writes for a young adult audience, so she definitely uses imagery and metaphor that I can appreciate, but it's also, at least particularly in this one, is not subtle either. Number 10 is not the last story we're talking about, but the last story in the collection, is titled Testing, referring to the testing behavior of a group of girls in a group home, testing the patience of their new house mother. Of the Tamora Pierce lore, she was working on The Song of the Lioness, her first publication, at the time that she was working in a group home as a house mother for these girls. And these young women had a direct influence on how that story came to be, and how The Song of the Lioness came to be, and how Tamora Pierce ended up breaking it into 4 from the single adult novel that it was originally written as. Also, first person point of view, the narrator never gets a name and is one of the girls. Testing is the only publication of Tamora Pierce's that has 0 magic or 0 fantastical elements and magic. It does still have the magic of building trust and connection. Lastly, we get to Nawat. This is the 4th story in the collection. If you liked Nawat in Trickster's Choice and Trickster's Queen, I would really recommend this story to you. It gives you Nawat's perspective to a degree that I kind of think will impact my reread when I go back to Trickster's Choice and Trickster's Queen, whenever that is. Nawat is still a crow. Yes, he's becoming human. Yes, he wants to be a man, but he also identifies still as crow. That's one of the things that Tamora Pierce does that I really appreciate. She just puts the perspective in a character that is not human-centric, even if they are in human form. I think this is the weakest of the stories because I don't think you can understand all its elements without knowing Trickster's Choice and Trickster's Queen. But I don't think you're expected to. It is in the middle of a collection that's Tortall and other lands. It's Tamora Pierce focused. It wasn't published anywhere else first. It kind of comes across like author fan fiction, which is not meant to be a criticism. Actually, it's just an acknowledgement that this is not a story that can stand without the story that it comes from, and that it's not for everyone. I've listened to an interview fairly recently where Tamora Pierce expresses that this short story is kind of revenge for her on Ollie. Ollie was the main character of the Trickster's Choice and Trickster's Queen series, and apparently was kind of difficult for Tammy to settle with her voice and her character and her personality. There is a pretty descriptive birth scene of triplets, and there is a lot of conversation about the bathrooming of the triplets, and the punchline of the story is an ambassador's secretary getting pooped on by a baby. As funny as that is, one of the things that makes this the weakest story is it's juggling too much, in a way. There's a lot packed into this 70-page story. There's all that I just said. That's a full story right there. There's the fact that one of those babies is going to be a dwarf. It's not clear to humans, but Nawat, the crow, has the ability to sense that his daughter is not going to grow in the expected way. And his internal story is how that conflicts with crow custom, how human care of a non-conforming person conflicts with crow custom. And then around that is the fact that Nawat and a bunch of other crows are walking around as humans, and that bothers the crows still living in the same city. So you've got 3 intense things going on. It just is a lot packed into this story. But it is funny, and it also features the Dark Kings, who are always straight up. Okay. And that's all of the 11 short stories. I am sure that this video is going to be an absolute nightmare for me to edit, but hopefully something in there intrigues you. I don't expect you to go out and buy this book, but it is my hope that if you come across it in a library or a thrift store or on a friend's bookshelf, you pick it up, you flip through a couple pages, and you find the one that catches your attention. If you want to support this video, go ahead and like it. If you've read this, please tell me what you thought about these stories, any of them. If you happen to have read any of these stories in one of the other collections, I would like to know about that and how that experience was reading this random Tamora Pierce story in among some other theme. You're half human, you're whatever it was. So let me know how that was for you coming across these short stories without the greater Tortall context. Yeah, particularly on this reread, I was very aware where certain seeds of stories in my own writing kind of came from, particularly Elder Brother. Yeah, I thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. I think I need to go make a pot of coffee now. See you next time.